Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and I am so excited to make this video. Last month, I had the opportunity to fly all the way to London to try out Final Fantasy XVI. Thank you, Square, for taking me across the world on my first trip to Europe to play Final Fantasy XVI inside the Tower of London. That sounds like fiction. But as much as I want to tell you about the trip to London itself, I know you clicked on this video to hear my thoughts on Final Fantasy XVI after actually playing it. Don't worry, no spoilers at all. Pretty sure Square would track me down if I did. And also, one disclaimer, it'll be at the bottom of the video, but content shown on the screen are from a special version made for media to experience, and contents may differ from the final version. So with that, let's get to it. For our gameplay preview, we actually had a lot of options to explore. The first was Clive in his youth, including tutorials and introductions to gameplay systems. I felt that the tutorials were short and effective, something I'm especially thankful for nowadays. Being an action game, I just want to learn something, get to try it, learn something, get to try it, and rinse and repeat. Just keeps the game flowing smoothly, and these early sections did go as such. Despite not having many abilities, though, they didn't shy away from the large or epic battles while also ensuring to include small, personal-feeling battles. There are fights with lots of enemies, fights with large enemies, and a constant need to reevaluate how I want to use the skills I was given and learned. The UI was quick and easy to navigate, and little details such as the save menu having the 2D sprite versions of the characters in the party at the time were thoroughly welcome. And without spoiling anything, the characters and their voice work here are all top-notch. I already knew I loved Cid's gravelly whimsy in his voice and Benedicta's menacing coldness in her voice from the trailers, but in conversation, these elements are really given time to shine. Sentence to sentence, the characters flow freely in such a way I couldn't help but be pulled into their words. I also had the privilege of meeting some of the voice actors. Susanna Fielding, who plays Jill, David Menken, who plays Barnabas, Nina Indis, who plays Benedicta, and Ben Starr, who plays Clive. All were wonderful people who indulged the fans and press alike. Ben especially seemed excited, meeting every request and even popping into a live stream to say hi after the event. Thank you, Ben, and looking forward to your performance as Clive. I've also included socials for all the voice actors in case any of you are just unaware of who's actually voicing who, so go ahead and follow them on socials. Now, as I played through, I was guided through a largely linear experience. I was able to go from stage to stage, as Yoshida calls them, where you enter a stage at a start point and gradually progress through the area to the end point before going back to the map to select the next stage. There are items hidden slightly off the beaten path, but these missions are designed to be more focused and less open. Now, once I got to play through a section of the game when Clive was young, they also let us play a section of the game where Clive is in his 20s, which I believe is what we've been seeing for the most part in the previews. Some of the stuff we got to play is also some of the stuff that we've seen in the previews, including a stop-off in the hideaway. If you've been keeping up with the news, it basically functions as a hub with all sorts of functions: side quests, lore, shops, upgrades, training options to practice Clive's skill, and we've seen some other functions and features from the hideaway in the various previews that I did not get to experience. Things such as the arcade mode and some other mystery function we've yet to be told about yet. Curious to find out what that is. In this section with Clive being older, I also got to experience some of the other gameplay elements that weren't available when I got to play Clive in his youth. One of the big ones was Torgal himself, who I absolutely adore, not just because he's a cute puppers, but because he is so functional in the gameplay. The biggest thing that he can do is that he is capable of launching enemies into the air or slamming them down, and that can be done pretty much on command, so you can use him to really extend the combos and really feel like not just an ally, but an extension of Clive himself. Now, he does also have other functions. He can do basic attacks, which he can use to juggle enemies or just pressure them, and he can even heal health that you recently took damage. So if you lost health recently, he can slowly heal that value if you just need a little bit of health and you don't want to use your items just yet and you think you can avoid getting hit. So Torgal feeling like an extension of Clive on top of all the other skills that we had already been introduced to was something I really got to enjoy when we played through the stages with Clive in his 20s. And it didn't stop there. We were also allowed to explore one of the field areas. Now, in these, you're given more free reign to run around and complete as few or as many objectives as possible. It's the most open feeling section of the game. I wasn't able to do much in this zone, especially with the limited time only having one day, but there were still encounters of varying difficulty, areas clearly designed to be part of potential side quests or hunts, and the ability to experiment with Clive's various abilities and skill sets while farming monsters monster drops for what would equate to upgrades in the full game. Curious to see how frequently time is spent in these types of areas when completing side quests and hunts later, but either way, it was just fun to run around and just play as Clive. That's one of the biggest highlights of the game, and this was the perfect place to do it. We were even given the choice of playing the section of the game from the February footage drop, where they were playing through the castle with Benedicta and the Garuda fight and all that stuff, which I gladly did. This had the most skills available of all the gameplay previews, and thus was the section I had the most fun with. I can't express, although I'll have to figure out how exciting it was to jump from the other preview sections to this, seeing just how different the level of depth was with just a few extra things available. Now for the gameplay itself. I've talked a lot about how much I loved playing it, but I haven't spoken much about the gameplay. But all you need to know is it is everything I wanted from this gameplay style. Coming from combat director Ryota Suzuki, known best for his work on various very high-profile Capcom games, the man is a master of his art, and here is no different. I'll be doing a deep dive on the customization, choices based on gameplay style, and more in a separate video. However, I wanted to comment a little bit on it here, and I found the gameplay fast and fluid with lots of room for personal expression in both skill and style. In other games in the same genre, it's more accepted that you'll access, or at least attempt to access, most, if not all of your options simultaneously in order to bring this pre-created playable character to their absolute peak. Clive felt much more like a product of choice. Icons all have very distinct aspects that can not only help you define your own playstyle, but they also ensure to bring something that assists the other icons in their own unique ways. We only had access to Phoenix, Garuda, and Titan, but these three felt like a match made in heaven as is, so I can't wait to experiment with the rest of them in the full game. However, there's one aspect in particular I didn't expect to want to talk about so much, and that's actually the Stagger Mechanic. Now, if you've been keeping up with other Square Enix projects, the Stagger Mechanic isn't really that new of a thing. Final Fantasy XIII and its sequels, as well as Final Fantasy VII Remake, all use some variation of the Stagger Mechanic. Basically, by damaging opponents, you can eventually stagger them, and that opens up a window where they're punching bags for your various skills. They do have a mini stagger about halfway through the bar that knocks them off balance and interrupts any skills for a brief moment, which is also a time that you can specifically use Garuda to pull them down and then open them up to even more attacks. While staggered though, they take greatly increased damage, and the value increases as you combo their helpless bodies. Now, the reason why I didn't expect to talk about that is, again, it's kind of just self-explanatory. You'll hit enemies and they'll stagger, and then you'll, just do as much damage as you possibly can. And it's that common sensibility that I think is the reason why I want to talk about it, because it's not so common a sensibility here in the way that it functionally works inside of combat. So, for the most basic enemies, honestly, they're fodder for your stronger skills. I feel like in a lot of the previews you've probably seen for gameplay, including the B-roll I'm using here, which is not me playing, by the way. This is just like stock footage we were given to use in order to express our points to you. It feels like they're kind of just deliberately doing less damage in a lot of these. And it's not even like they're playing poorly. It's just like the damage values are tuned down so you can kind of see Clive's style on things. But when you use your iconic abilities on the easier enemies, the ones that are not meant to be like super long fights or take a while, you can obliterate things. And it is so fun running through, finding a pack that has a bunch of enemies, doing something to round them up, and obliterating them. And because the abilities still recharge when out of combat, I found it so much fun to just bash and brutalize every pack with everything in my arsenal. I was basically, at some points, coming up with like rotations, like, okay, so on this pack, I'm going to do this, and then on the next pack, I'll use these skills, and then by then, the first skills will be back, and then I only had to, shake that up when there would be bigger, stronger enemies. And there are those. In a lot of these packs that do have a lot of trash mobs, there's usually like a larger enemy somewhere in that pack, deals more damage, doesn't exactly get interrupted by any of your skills, and so then I had to dial back and play a bit more strategically. I would usually try to make sure that I was removing stagger bar from that bigger enemy while making sure the more, easy to kill enemies were nearby, because then they just become incidental. You can just knock them out and it's not much of a problem at all. But then when bosses came around, I actually had to really reevaluate the way that I wanted to play the stagger bar. I feel like, again, the way that my brain initially thought of doing it just doesn't really play out that way when it comes to the practicality of actually doing the fights. But as for the bosses themselves, without speaking too much about any particular details, every single one had a different feel, a different means of playing against them, and I had to pay attention to very different things. It also helps, again, that there are bosses that are, that are like Clive's size, and then there's also bosses that are massive, and the types of skills you can effectively use and utilize against them does change significantly. So it made me already think like, well, if I had other icons, would I be playing this fight any differently? And honestly, the answer is yes, just from what we've seen from the previews versus what I got to actually play. So I think what most people are going to default to is they're going to want to save all their biggest hitting skills for when bosses are staggered. And I did try to do that to some capacity, but the speed at which you can reach these points definitely encourages you to use abilities in order to actually stagger the enemy. And that sounds like common sense, but so does trying to save every ability for when something is staggered, because you don't have a lot of time to deal that damage once they're staggered. So I started balancing short cooldown skills to boost my stagger damage and save my hardest hitting longer cooldown skills for when the down had happened. That way I could actually use skills in such a way that let me interact with the bosses, because there are skills that are not meant to be saved. They're really skills that are for keeping uptime on the bosses or for skill expression. For example, there's one skill where you actually backstep, and if you successfully dodge an attack with the backstep, then the follow-up attack afterwards is empowered. You're not going to use that on something when it's down, so a skill like that really begs to be utilized against enemies actively. That's something you want to use in order to push the stagger down and to just keep pressure on. Because it's just a small period of time between the dodge and the follow-up attack as well, you then get to keep pushing immediately with your various other combos. But that's not the only type of skill that I'm referring to. There are just other short cooldown skills that you may find an opportunity to use. Maybe your next skill will push their stagger bar down to that 50%, which then allows you to Garuda pull them down if you've decided to bring that icon, and then you can follow up with some basic attacks or another short cooldown to reduce the stagger more, and then both of those will be back by the time you actually get the stagger bar to 0. Of course, a lot of this is assuming that you're very comfortable with these style of games, and if you're not comfortable, there's a good chance you're using iconic skills in order to push the stagger bar just to relieve the pressure of having to dodge attacks and having to think too much about the patterns the bosses have. So again, there's just so much expression about how people are going to choose to get through these bosses that the stagger bar just isn't an instant, oh, I'm just going to hit them with my basic attacks and dodge, and when they go down, I'll just use that. Because honestly, it'll take you way longer than trying to incorporate the other skills into your active gameplay. One of my favorite things was the limit break, actually. It greatly increases Clive's output. It's a clear tool that, again, has that same dual functionality, using it in order to push their stagger bar down more quickly or to use it to punish a stagger you've already forced out. But it also has other high skill expression shenanigans, including animation canceling and extended combos. Not to mention bringing stat buffing potions to abuse stagger phases even further. There's just so many things that a player can remember to do or bring in case they're not experienced with this kind of game to make these types of experiences more fun or easier. And on top of that, you still have Torgal. One thing I had to get used to a lot, though, with Torgal, and I didn't mention this earlier, is that Torgal and your items are both the D-pad, but you press left on the D-pad in order to swap between them. So what ends up happening is you kind of have to get used to the idea of which one you have out at any given time. Like, you don't want to have Torgal out and wish you had your potions out because you just got hit by something, and then just spam Torgal abilities because you weren't paying attention. On the flip side, you don't want to be on items and then want to tell Torgal to do something, but you forgot to swap over. So that was something that actually took a little bit extra, I suppose, brain power to get used to in the really short time that we had. And I think that is something that people will probably make mistakes with, but it's just one of those things that once you have enough time, you get used to it, or you establish your gameplay style enough that you determine that one or the other is probably more important to you at all times. It's funny because this isn't the gameplay breakdown video, and I still had all of that to say. I mean, I'm just excited to talk about it. Like, Final Fantasy XVI is a game I have had my eye on for so long. The opportunity to play it ahead of time, to experience these core elements, it's just, and sorry for the pun, it's just ignited a fire in me that it just can't stop thinking, and I've had to be quiet about it since playing it with all of this pent up and built in. And it's not even to mention, like, I didn't even talk about how the game looks beautiful. It runs well. I did play it in performance mode, but it looked good and played well in performance mode, so that's all I can really ask for. The music, oh my goodness. You're not ready. I mean, even if you've heard Soken's work before, the composer Masayoshi Soken, I still don't think you're ready for what your ears are going to hear. Even the trailers don't do some of the themes that we got to hear justice. Like, not that they sound bad there, but when you're experiencing them actively in the game, it is on a whole nother level. The environments are varied and fun, and the stage aspect actually gives you this sense of change. Like, you go from like one stage that's it's actually a city, and then you have one stage that's out in the woods, and one stage that's a swampy marsh. So you have all these different varying environments on top of the field areas, one that we got to experience and ones that we've seen in the previews that they've given us earlier, like the YouTube videos and whatnot. And it's what I wanted. It's everything that I wanted. And the only sad thing about it is I know at some point I'll have beaten it and I'll just want to play it again. And I'll just be like, I just want to experience it for that. I already want to experience the beginning for the first time again. And maybe I'll have that feeling when I actually get to play it, when it actually releases. But yeah, I guess that's where I'll wrap that up, because now I'm just emotional and rambling. But yeah, I'm excited. That's the end of the video. I'm excited. So hopefully you enjoyed hearing me talk about Final Fantasy 16. Keep an eye on the channel. I actually got to do an interview with Yoshi P about Final Fantasy 16 and certain aspects of it. And I also am doing a deep dive on the gameplay. And I'm finally going to go back and cover all the videos and all the interviews and other things that I have missed because I didn't want to accidentally say something I knew because I'd played it. So that's why there hasn't been 16 content, because I've just been afraid of screwing up because I'm too passionate about it right now. But let me know what you thought. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and stay tuned, because I can promise you there will be a lot of 16 content here in the coming weeks and months. Until then, enjoy your day. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.